Alright, welcome into this update on what we have coming as we go into the next 7 days or so, especially with the weather ahead across the country. I'm still kind of sick, everyone, so if you hear me cough or something like that, I apologize as we go through this update. But let's go ahead and get right into it. I want to start by actually flipping over from this graphic and going over to my custom graphic so I can give you the latest look at what I'm anticipating in terms of snowfall, ice, and related winter weather impacts as we go through the next several days. I've talked about it in the last few videos, and I want to go ahead and overview these snow tracks now as well here on this graphic. This is the one for the near term. This is your snow tracks graphic from February 5th through 6th. I'll talk about some of the rainfall impacts out of each of these individual systems as well as we go deeper into this quick update. First of all, again, as you know, snow ongoing, continuing through parts of the northern U.S. We're going to see some snow as we go through tonight, our February 5th, into our February 6th, coming out of parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then stretching down over into Michigan. The Northeast, especially into parts of the interior Northeast, getting a decent chance for snowfall, although it will transition to ice and rain in some of these zones, and you can see a lot of zones really looking at ice expected to ramp up as we go through the rest of this evening and then into tonight, from parts of the Midwest to the Ohio Valley, stretching into the Mid-Atlantic and then over into the Northeast. If I pivot on over now to the snow tracks graphic for February 8th through 9th, haven't had to make many changes to this today. This is your snow tracks graphic again for that 8th through 9th time frame as we go into the upcoming weekend. Snow really looking like it's going to follow the corridor right along the Dakota border, and then down here through southern and central parts of Minnesota, through central Wisconsin, a lot of Michigan, and then down here into the Northeast, including even coastal parts of places like Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, being able to go a little bit more uninterrupted with snow possibly this time in some of these zones. Also some ice possible on the south side of that. And then as we pivot to that next chance for snow, this is going to be the one that's still in question, just like I talked about in the last video update. But anywhere from the Central Plains down through the Midwest and Mid-Mississippi Valley, over to the Ohio Valley, parts of the Central Appalachians, and then into the Northeast. That is where our next snow chance is going to set up sometime around February 10th through 12th, and we could even have more snowstorms after that with an active weather pattern on the way. With that being said, go ahead and make sure you're hitting that like button down below to support this update, and let's go ahead and pivot on over back here now to the European model so that we can overview storm number 1, then we'll talk about storm number 2, then storm number 3 in that order. Let's start with the storm number 1, which is going to be ongoing as we go overnight tonight, and of course into our Thursday, February 6th. We're going to be watching as we go even through the middle of the night tonight. Thunderstorms picking up here in this region, including Tennessee, Kentucky, up into southern Indiana. The best chance for some isolated severe weather out of this is going to be into central Kentucky and stretching into some parts of Tennessee, where we could even have the threat for an isolated tornado or two into the overnight hours. Make sure you have a way to receive alerts as a result of that. Flooding could occur, but it's not going to be a big issue in a lot of these zones. What's going to be a bigger issue up to the north through northern Indiana, Illinois, and then on over here into Ohio, Pennsylvania, is going to be the freezing rain. This is going to become less of a problem as temperatures are actually going to warm up enough for this to start melting and there to be more of just regular rain as we go into the daylight hours of Thursday. But if you can avoid travel, especially before about mid-morning in a lot of these zones with freezing rain ongoing into our Thursday, especially pre-dawn time frame, please try to avoid any early morning travel on those roadways, especially into Ohio, Pennsylvania. You can see that ice really picking up into that time frame again out of this first winter storm that looks pretty significant. Snow during this time frame continuing and then starting to end as we go into Thursday morning, although the gusty winds will pick up throughout the day in this area where I just put the squiggly line coming out of Minnesota into Wisconsin and Michigan. Some gusts even upwards of 40 to 50 miles per hour, reaching that wind advisory criteria in a few of these zones. Notice we get a shield of snow on up here into parts of the Northeast, a little bit of some ice following in behind that down here into some parts of the Mid-Atlantic. That's going to turn your snow to a slushy mess, really making for nasty travel into some parts of southern New England and the Mid-Atlantic zones, including areas especially around and north of New York City where you see less of a transition to rain as it's more ice throughout the event. That's something we'll be worried about, and then maybe a secondary round of some final thunderstorms to finish this event around Thursday night going into Friday. That could become a problem briefly with some isolated flooding and maybe even an isolated instance of some gusty winds with these storms Thursday going into Friday over parts of Kentucky and Tennessee. And then winter storm number 1 is going to be going into the history books. By the time we get to the end of Friday, it's going to be like it almost never happened, and the impacts are going to be gone for a lot of zones, except where we still have lingering slushiness on roadways as you go on up there into the northeastern quadrant of the U.S. In terms of total forecasted snowfall out of this particular winter storm, let's look at the National Digital Forecast Database for its projected totals. I'm not going to zoom in too much. This is a pretty routine amount of snowfall for a lot of these zones. On up here in northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, it's going to cause some issues and maybe some isolated travel issues, but I feel like a lot of people who are used to driving through these kinds of conditions should be able to be okay until we start to see some of those winds pick up into our Thursday over some of these zones. Some of those blue spots, especially getting upwards of 2 to 4 inches of snow. Isolated spots there in the Arrowhead of Minnesota, up into the upper peninsula of Michigan, maybe even getting closer to 4 to 6 inches of snow out of this event. More like a dusting to an inch or so, pretty negligible snow through southern Minnesota, central Wisconsin on down here into central Michigan. Then we look at the northeast. Yeah, you'll get snow, maybe even up to an inch briefly as we go overnight tonight in a place like Pennsylvania, into New Jersey, into New York City. It's going to turn over to ice, and then it's going to turn over to rain in these areas, just making for that slushy mess that no one wants to deal with. And then on up here into the rest of the interior northeast, 2 to 4 inches in a place like Massachusetts, but then you turn over to ice, and then it gets messy. The spot where the snow will get most uninterrupted is going to be back on up here into Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and that's where you're going to have the much lower chance of sleet, ice, and just those, mix-in concerns that really just deplete your snowfall amounts and turn everything nasty on the roadways. In terms of your forecast ice accretion, again, a lot of this is going to be an issue in this region here of the Ohio Valley as we go into the morning time frame on our Thursday. Let's look at it like this. Here we go. You can see the graphic on your screen. As you come on up here out of parts of Iowa and into Wisconsin, Illinois, as we go again through the night tonight into early Thursday, watching some of that significant ice, a glaze to 1/10 of an inch, so I shouldn't call that area significant, excuse me. Some lower end ice, but this could still cause some isolated travel impacts. That'll quickly get out of here, and it won't be as much of a travel concern as we go quickly through the morning on Thursday. Some lingering issues could continue, though, because of the 1/10 to 1/4 of an inch of ice that's anticipated here, coming out of parts of Indiana through a lot of north-central Ohio, including the Cleveland area, and then on up there into Erie, PA. If we stretch this over into the Mid-Atlantic region, you can see we've got some significant ice that's going to impact a lot of Maryland, eastern West Virginia, and northern Virginia. Some of these spots right in here in the Appalachian Mountain Range, really on the border of West Virginia and Virginia. I think we could get up to a 1/2 an inch of freezing rain accretion there on surfaces. That's enough to cause more widespread issues with roadways and even some more isolated to scattered power outages. I think power outages will be more isolated over some of these other areas. And then here's the rest of the Northeast. Notice not a lot of ice, but this just really, punches in your snowfall, even if it's not much, with a quick glaze to 1/10 of an inch over a lot of areas, anywhere from Philly in northern New Jersey all the way on up here on the north side of New York City. And then on up there into parts of the interior Northeast, even dealing with some of the ice in some instances. Then we move on beyond this storm after that, and we're going to be talking about the next winter storm. So let's go ahead and pivot things back on over to this. Flip that to that. All right, here we go. We're going to talk about the next one because it's just going to be on the way by the time we go out of Friday into Saturday. First of all, I find it important that I mention the fact that as we go out of this upcoming Thursday into Friday, while everything is wrapping up into parts of the northeast U.S., we're pretty much done with that winter storm that's going to be moving off the East Coast, winter storm number 1. Our next one, winter storm number 2, getting itself together back here, California, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, into Wyoming. Especially as you go up in elevation, pretty much all of this falling as snow, especially into those interior areas. We will have some gusty wind with this at times, and then it moves out into the north central plains where you can already see a little bit of light rain trying to move up into the Ohio Valley, moisture moving north there, moisture moving in from the west, and you're about to have your next low pressure system forming a little bit further south, as I mentioned and showed you with that custom graphic just a little bit ago. As we go into the day Saturday, it's not necessarily guaranteed to look like this, but it looks like we're going to have a field of expanding general shower activity here into a lot of the nation's midsection, coming out of the mid-Mississippi Valley into parts of the Ohio Valley. And then we're also going to have possibly a little bit of a heavier shield of snow with this particular event. And I think that's especially going to ramp up coming through Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then over here into Michigan. How far towards the southern border of Michigan this gets, or if it's ice there, that's something that's going to be a little bit tricky to forecast. It looks like we're going to have ice develop in some of these zones, though, and where that ice sets up, it is going to last for a little more of an extended period of time. Might not get replaced by regular rainfall. It'll stay freezing rain longer. That could be an issue here in some parts of Indiana, Ohio, and especially Pennsylvania. Once again, deja vu almost, just a few days later by the time we go into this weekend with the next winter storm. But then your big shift here comes with the storm, not with the threat for thunderstorms late Friday going into Saturday. That looks pretty similar, right? Maybe some of the same zones cashing in on isolated severe weather as with the first storm here into the Ohio Valley. But it's the Northeast that looks a little different. Let's zoom in on it so that you can see that really up close here. It looks like parts of Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts are going to try and stay as heavy snowfall with this event as opposed to transitioning over to an ice event. The ice could definitely, become a problem. In fact, it looks likely to become a problem again back towards a place like New York City. But look at that. This model's showing ice struggling to make it up past, especially those coastal areas. And the GFS model is doing the exact same thing. Ice and sleet staying much closer to the coast and down towards around the New York City area, and then rain points south. So that would dump a lot heavier of snowfall here into some parts of even coastal New England. And let's go ahead and give you a look at what the European ensembles, some blended guidance, are indicating so that you can see the latest look at what the projected snowfall totals could look like area by area, especially with this conservative guidance. Some areas could definitely see some locally higher totals out of that next storm. First of all here, this is as we go from Thursday, getting through some portion of Friday. Notice all of our snow back here into the Mountain West, where those higher elevations in Northern California, through some parts of central and eastern Oregon, central and southern Idaho, into parts of Montana, and then the Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming cross sections there. A lot of spots in the grays picking up at least a couple inches of snow, and then some spots that are up into the blues picking up more like upwards of 3 to 5 inches of snow, definitely in Northern California. Even within this, we're looking at 12-hour rates here. You could easily pick up 3 to 6 inches of snow in 12 hours there in some of the central and northern California mountains out of this. Notice there's your 24-hour increments. So this is from late Thursday through some part of Friday. It looks like we could exceed a foot quickly there into the Northern California mountains, while a lot of the rest of these mountains a little bit further inland, upwards of 3 to 6. Let's go back over to the 12-hour accumulations, though. Here you go, and let's pivot back to this. You can see what happens with that signal on these European ensembles. Looks like we could get a quick swath of upwards of 3 inches of snowfall quickly moving through, especially where those blues are showing a couple of inches in a lot of the gray zones surrounding that, moving through the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin. So a little bit heavier for these zones than the first storm, and a little bit further south. Same goes for a lot of Michigan, where even Detroit could get a few inches of snow. And then there's your bigger signal. Again, for ensemble guidance to be doing this in the Northeast U.S., this is something you got to focus in on. A blend of guidance is showing upwards of 4 to 6 inches of snow over a broad stretch. And this is just in 24-hour time frame from around Saturday evening to Sunday evening of parts of New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, stretching down into Connecticut, Rhode Island, and even towards Long Island. I think we'll go, get interrupted by some winter weather, turning over to maybe some just regular rain or ice in some of these zones. But up into here, these could be uninterrupted snow totals, and we could see upwards of 6 inches in some of these spots out of the second storm. And that's going to be something we're going to have to continue to track as we get closer to that particular system. Then, one last thing that we got to take a look at is something that'll be covering, I'm sure, in another future live update or video. It's this next winter storm that we're going to get after that. And this is just a broad overview of what it could look like. Looks like these zones are going to be the next areas to cash in. Anywhere from possibly the Central Plains over to the Ohio Valley, stretching over into the Mid-Atlantic. And with that, that concludes most of my live update, except for this, as I want to briefly give you a quick look at what we could be seeing in terms of the forecast high temperatures through the next few days. Well, we've got that big winter storm going on tomorrow. Winter storm number 1 of these few I've talked about. Low pressure moving through this general zone right here, warming up a lot of the areas that had ice earlier in the day into the 40s and 50s in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. Back down to the south, a lot of 60s, lots of 70s, lots of 80s, and the 60s up there in Kentucky are going to be just enough to fuel some of those storms that will be lingering into the morning, to maybe even fire back up later in the day and into the night, Thursday going to Thursday night. with yet another round of possible severe weather moving out of there into Tennessee. Those boxes indicate possibly record warm highs. By the way, look at the contrast. 85 Texas. If you go due north of there up into northern North Dakota, we're at 13 degrees. That's a crazy, just different 70 degrees from the northern border of the U.S. down to the southern border. As we go into Friday, not much of a difference in the temperature contrast, although these temperatures get suppressed a little bit further south by that front that's going to come in behind your first winter storm. A lot of teens and 20s up north, though, and a lot of 60s and 70s right down here on the southern border. So we're going to continue this high contrast pattern, and that's what's going to keep these winter storms flowing. Look, warm air starts moving back north into the weekend with that next one, then it goes south. Then it might try to push a little bit further north, although it'll struggle a little bit because our next snow track's going to be more like this as we go into next week, or I should say more like this. Something we're going to be watching, and I'll keep you updated on with future videos and live streams. So I appreciate you tuning in to this one for all the latest information. Let's see what we got down here in the live chat of this live stream here. I appreciate everybody who's tuned in with me here. Apologize for the coughing here at times throughout this update. Let's see what we've got. Not too much going on in the chat right now, but let's see. MJ Franklin, will there be any chance of snow in Montgomery, Alabama? I would not bank on anything like that anytime soon. The HRRR model is showing crazy amounts of ice in my area, Severe Storm Filmer says. Yeah, we can go ahead and take a quick look at that. Let's go over to the HRRR model and give you a look at the forecasted freezing rain total. States, your usual area being Ohio. What's going up over there? Yeah, quick tenth to a quarter of an inch over a lot of zones, just like the National Digital Forecast Database was showing as we go, especially really through the early morning hours of tomorrow. And then your temperature, look at that, as we go beyond 4, 5, 6 a.m., by noontime, it's almost 40 in a lot of central Ohio, and even into the mid and upper 30s into some parts of northeast Ohio. So that's going to help in really melting that ice in a lot of these zones. And in fact, even back into PA, where we have like half an inch of ice there into those mountains and the stretching down into West Virginia, it's going to be 50 by the afternoon. Let's turn this off real quick. Appreciate you, Robert Brown says. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for making videos and hosting live streams while you're sick. Severe Storm Filmer says thank you for that. Hoping to be on the uptrend very, very shortly. Will it snow in Denton, Texas? Good question. Right now, I don't see anything significant in the near horizon or anything like that for a place like Texas. It looks like rain even with that third system that we could get into next week, and even beyond then, it's still very questionable if we could see snow that far south. The only run where you see something like that is on a fantasy, basically, time frame as you go towards like February 15th, 16th. So I wouldn't trust anything like that. But the models are hinting that we could get a bigger cool down into some parts of the central and eastern U.S. at some point deeper into February, and that could maybe give you one last shot before winter's all said and done. So stay tuned for that. Central Missouri, you're going to have a better shot of snow as early as with that possibly third system, Hannah M. That system that we could get into next week. Look at that. I know it doesn't look too high confidence on this Euro model alone, but if we look at ensemble guidance, look, you're in that crosshairs for an area that could see a snow chance, could be multiple inches of snow sometime around the early part of next week. And Severe Storm Filmer, I see your question about your area. Yeah, you could definitely get some snow out of whatever we get into the early to mid part of next week. There could be multiple rounds, and the next round can move even further north. So, it's not just 1, 2, 3, and there's going to be a fourth and a fifth, too, eventually. Wish you weren't sick. Elevators by Rainmave says, I appreciate that. Appreciate the love to everybody who's sending those messages in the chat as well. D. Davis, you too. Thank you. But that's going to be it for this live stream update. I appreciate everybody who's tuned in. Make sure you're hitting that like button. And, you know, share these updates out with family and friends. They can be watched after I'm done being live. That's why I do the forecast like I just did before I answer any individual questions, because the first 10, 15 minutes of each of these streams is just me talking about weather like I would in a regular video. And some people can get value from that even after it's over. With that being said, that's all I got. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate everything from everybody in the chat. See you next time.